Naomi Carter had planned hundreds of weddings, but never in her life had she imagined her own would be the one people whispered about for years. She was 29, a successful event planner in Savannah, Georgia, the woman who made other brides' dreams come true. Her groom, Ethan Miles, was everything she thought she wanted. 32, charming, ambitious, and devoted. Or so it seemed. The ceremony would be officiated by Father Michael, the young, respected priest Ethan spoke so highly of. Together, they had spent hours in private planning meetings Naomi wasn't part of, sharing late-night calls she brushed off as church business. With 300 guests filling the cathedral, cameras ready, and her parents spending more than she dared to admit, Naomi thought she was walking into the perfect day. What she didn't know was that some of the people closest to her were already holding secrets that could shatter it all. Naomi Carter was the kind of woman people admired from a distance. 29 years old, sharp-witted, and running one of the most sought-after event planning businesses in Savannah, Georgia. She had built her career with precision, transforming ordinary gatherings into unforgettable experiences. She knew how to spot trouble in a seating chart, how to solve problems before they even existed, but when it came to her own wedding, she believed everything was perfect. The groom was Ethan Miles, a 32-year-old entrepreneur with an easy smile and the kind of charm that could win over anyone in a room. They met 2 years earlier at a charity gala, a night filled with laughter, champagne, and the kind of eye contact that makes you believe in fate. Within months, Ethan had not only stolen her heart, but won over her parents, her friends, and seemingly her entire world. The wedding was to be officiated by Father Michael, young, charismatic, and well-respected in their community. He and Ethan had struck up a friendship almost immediately after Naomi introduced them, bonding over faith, business ideas, and shared late-night conversations Naomi often assumed were about church logistics. Ethan had always spoken about how much he respected the church, how deeply he valued its guidance. Naomi took comfort in that, believing it meant her marriage would be built on strong moral ground. Yet, in the months leading up to the wedding, there were moments that didn't quite fit. Ethan would spend hours at the church without her, sometimes meeting with Father Michael well past midnight. When she asked, he'd smile and say they were ironing out ceremony details, things she didn't need to worry about. She trusted him. She wanted to trust him. Naomi's parents had spared no expense for the day. 300 guests, an extravagant cathedral ceremony, white roses spilling from every pew. Even local media outlets had been invited to cover the occasion. The Carter family name carried weight in Savannah, and their daughter's wedding was a social highlight of the season. The pressure to deliver a flawless event wasn't just professional for Naomi, it was personal. She knew every detail would be remembered, photographed, and talked about for years, and she wanted it to be remembered for the right reasons. What Naomi didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that behind the sparkle of champagne flutes and the glow of stained glass windows, fault lines were already forming in her new marriage. Lines that began in quiet moments, in hushed phone calls, and in conversations she was never invited to be part of. The morning of the wedding should have been filled with nothing but joy, but Naomi couldn't shake the weight in her chest. As she stepped into her gown, the lace hugging her shoulders just right, something felt different. Ethan had barely looked at her during their pre-ceremony photos, his eyes darting away whenever she caught his gaze. She tried to tell herself it was nerves. Every groom feels the pressure. Yet deep down, she felt the subtle sting of being kept at arm's length. In the corner of the church, her bridesmaids fluttered around her, adjusting her veil and smoothing her train. But just beyond that warm hum of chatter, Naomi's mind was elsewhere, chasing a quiet unease she couldn't name. She had planned countless weddings before this one, and yet she had never seen a groom so absent on his own day. 15 minutes before the ceremony, one of her bridesmaids had stepped into the hallway to grab a forgotten lipstick. Passing Father Michael's private office, she heard muffled laughter, low voices behind a closed door. She didn't think much of it. A wedding day was full of little moments, private jokes, and last-minute pep talks. But she remembered one thing clearly. Ethan's voice was there, warm and familiar, followed by the priest's. And something about it didn't sound like a rehearsal for vows. When she returned to the bridal suite, Naomi was smiling for yet another photo, but her mind flickered over every small oddity in recent weeks. The late nights, the hushed calls, the shared glances she couldn't quite explain. Then her mother, elegant and poised in a deep blue dress, stepped close and took her hand. "If something feels wrong, don't ignore it," she whispered. "Even today." Naomi laughed softly, brushing it off as pre-wedding jitters, but the words lodged themselves deep. It was as if her mother saw something Naomi couldn't. Minutes later, the coordinator popped her head in to say the guests were seated, the music was ready, and it was time to line up. That's when someone realized Ethan wasn't there. He had disappeared just before the processional without telling anyone. A twinge of anxiety rippled through Naomi's chest, and she found herself stepping away from her bridesmaids. She didn't know why, but she needed to find him, and when Naomi went looking for him, she found something no bride should ever see. Naomi stepped out of the bridal suite, the noise of her bridesmaids fading behind her. The hallway stretched long and empty, the marble floor cool under her heels. Somewhere in the distance, the organist practiced a soft refrain of the processional, each note echoing faintly off the high ceilings. She checked the groom's room. Empty. The vestry. Empty. She passed the side chapel, peeking in to see nothing but rows of flickering candles. Then, just ahead, she heard it. Faint voices, low and quick, carrying from a hallway that led to the private offices. Her footsteps slowed, every sound amplified, the click of her shoes, the rustle of her dress, the faint hum of air through the vents. She turned a corner and saw a narrow bathroom door, slightly ajar. A sliver of light cut across the floor. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as she pushed the door open an inch wider. At first, the image didn't make sense. Ethan was there, and so was Father Michael, the man who was supposed to bless their marriage, the man she had trusted. But they weren't speaking, they weren't praying. Their closeness, the way their bodies moved, left no room for misunderstanding. It was intimate, far beyond anything a bride should witness on her wedding day. Naomi's stomach turned cold, as if every drop of blood had drained from her body in an instant. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, her mind ricocheting between disbelief, humiliation, and a sharp, rising anger. Every late-night meeting, every whispered call, every unexplained absence, it all clicked into place in one devastating moment. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. Instead, Naomi stepped back, her veil brushing the floor like a ghost slipping out of sight. She turned down the hallway, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the organ music. Behind her, the door remained half-closed, the scene inside continuing, unaware they had been caught. Naomi's face was calm, almost unreadable, but inside, something had shifted permanently. That walk back to the bridal suite felt longer than the aisle she was about to walk, and as she rejoined her bridesmaids, adjusting her bouquet as if nothing had happened, one thought anchored itself in her mind. The wedding would still happen, but it would not happen the way anyone expected. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the church swung open, and every head turned. But instead of the white gown they had been expecting, Naomi Carter stepped into the aisle wearing deep crimson. The color clung to her like a warning, the train trailing behind her with quiet defiance. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers swelling as she moved forward with unhurried steps. Some guests smiled in confusion, thinking it was a bold fashion choice. Others felt the tension in the air and knew, instinctively, that something was very wrong. At the altar, Father Michael's eyes flickered, a flash of recognition, then panic, while Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his forced smile wavering. Naomi didn't falter. Each step was measured, her gaze locked straight ahead, not on the man she was meant to marry, but on the truth she was about to release into the room like a storm. She reached the front and, without hesitation, took the microphone from Father Michael mid-sentence, cutting through the opening prayer. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as she turned to face the sea of familiar faces. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her tone warm but edged with something unshakable. "I know you've traveled from near and far to witness what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life." She paused, letting the silence stretch until even the restless shuffling stopped. "But before we begin, I feel it's only fair to share with you all what I witnessed 15 minutes before I was supposed to walk down this aisle." And then, in chilling detail, she told them. She described the half-closed bathroom door, the voices, the intimacy, her own groom and the man standing beside her now, hands clasped in holy robes. The air inside the church fractured, gasps erupted from the pews. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. An older man stood abruptly and walked out without a word. Ethan's mother gripped her husband's arm as though she might collapse. Some guests looked away in shame, others stared in disbelief, phones already raised to capture the moment. Naomi's eyes never wavered. She turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. "I'll leave you two," she said evenly, "to finish the ceremony however you want." Without waiting for a response, she stepped away from the altar, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Photographers, frozen for a moment, snapped back to life, cameras flashing as she made her way to the doors. Within hours, those images, the bride in red walking away, would travel farther and faster than she ever could have imagined. By the next morning, the world knew her name. Videos of Naomi walking down the aisle in that crimson gown flooded every corner of social media. Hashtags like "the red dress bride" and "wedding walkout" trended for days. Clips of her speech, filmed on shaky phones from multiple angles, were shared millions of times. Local news stations ran segments dissecting every second of the moment she took the microphone. Talk shows debated whether it was an act of bravery or humiliation. The comments poured in. Strangers calling her an icon, others expressing heartbreak for what she'd endured. Naomi stayed silent through it all, watching the storm from the quiet of her living room, coffee in hand, as her phone buzzed endlessly beside her. The fallout extended far beyond her. Within a week, church leadership announced an internal investigation into Father Michael, citing concerns about inappropriate conduct and breach of pastoral trust. Ethan's polished public image began to crumble. Several of his business partners pulled out of contracts, citing ethical concerns. Invitations to high-profile networking events disappeared overnight. Friends who had once sung his praises quietly distanced themselves. For the first time since she'd met him, Naomi realized Ethan couldn't charm his way out of this. His smile had lost its power. The whispers around town weren't about her anymore, they were about him. When Naomi finally broke her silence, it wasn't in an Instagram post or a dramatic statement. She sat across from a local TV anchor, her posture composed, her voice steady. "I didn't get revenge," she said simply. "I just told the truth in front of the people who needed to hear it." The clip aired that evening, cementing her as the woman who turned her wedding into a reckoning. But away from the cameras, the strength came at a cost. In the quiet hours, alone in her apartment, Naomi let herself cry, not for the loss of Ethan, but for the loss of the life she thought she'd been building. Her public face remained unshakable, but in private, she grieved the version of herself that had once believed in fairy tales. In the quiet months after the wedding that never was, Naomi found herself at a crossroads. She could stay in Savannah, living under the weight of sideways glances and whispered conversations, or she could take her broken pieces somewhere new, somewhere her story wasn't the first thing people thought of when they heard her name. One morning, without ceremony, she made her decision. She packed her apartment into a dozen cardboard boxes, taped them shut, and sent a moving truck toward a city she had only ever visited twice. There was no dramatic farewell, no announcement. She simply left. In her new city, she was no longer the red dress bride. She was just Naomi Carter. and that anonymity felt like the first deep breath she had taken in months. She found an apartment with tall windows that let the sunlight pour in, and on her first night there, she ate takeout on the floor, smiling at the thought that she could start again without anyone's permission. But she didn't just rebuild her life, she redefined it. With her years of experience as an event planner, Naomi launched something different from anything she'd done before. A wedding consultancy that didn't just focus on flowers, music, and seating charts, but on protecting brides from the kind of blindsiding betrayal she had endured. She told her clients the truth. "We plan for beauty," she'd say with a steady smile, "but we also plan for honesty." She taught them to ask questions most couples avoided. She encouraged open conversations that felt uncomfortable but necessary. And slowly, her business became known as the place where women went not just to design their perfect day, but to safeguard their future. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was helping others build the very thing she had lost. But instead of bitterness, she felt a sense of quiet purpose, as though every heartbreak she had carried now had a use. Meanwhile, the other two people at the center of that day's scandal chose different paths. Ethan, once a man with an enviable network and a string of high-profile business deals, began to fade from the circles that had once celebrated him. His overseas move was quiet but calculated, a retreat to a place where the red dress story wasn't on every stranger's lips. His social media, once a steady stream of smiling photographs and polished updates, slowed to near silence. Father Michael, too, slipped out of sight. There was no grand statement from the pulpit, no tearful apology to the congregation. One Sunday, his seat was empty, and it stayed that way. Months later, Naomi heard through a friend that he had left the priesthood entirely. No one seemed to know where he went. And yet, for Naomi, the story followed her, not in the way she feared, but in ways she never expected. Letters began arriving at her office. Some were handwritten in neat, careful script. Others were typed and signed only with a first name. They came from across the country, from brides, from divorced women, from strangers who had seen the video and felt a piece of themselves in her calm, steady voice that day. One woman wrote, "You gave me the courage to walk away before I said I do." Another confessed, "I thought I was alone until I saw you tell the truth in front of everyone who mattered." Naomi kept each one, tucking them into a small wooden box on her desk. Some days she read through them when she needed reminding that the most painful moment of her life had, somehow, become a lifeline for someone else. And in that realization, the sharp edges of her pain began to dull. She was not just the woman in the red dress anymore. She was the woman who refused to stay silent. When the storm ends, there is no sudden silence. The echoes linger, the whispers stay, and the heart, it still feels the weight of what it's been through. Betrayal isn't always loud. It doesn't always arrive in the form of a stranger or an enemy. More often, it comes wrapped in the comfort of the familiar, the warm voice you trusted, the face you loved, the hand you thought would never let go. And when that trust shatters, it doesn't just break you, it changes you. For Naomi, this wasn't just about a wedding gone wrong. It was about the moment her reality fractured in front of an entire room of people who thought they knew her story. It was about realizing, in an instant, that the man she was about to build her life with had been building his with someone else all along. She could have walked away quietly. She could have packed her things, disappeared, let the gossip fade with time. But Naomi understood something. Silence would have been the final wound. It would have been surrender, and surrender was never in her nature. So she chose to stand there, in that crimson dress, the color of defiance, and speak the truth. Not behind closed doors, not whispered in shame, but in the very place where the lies were born, with every eye watching, every ear listening. And in that moment, the story stopped being about humiliation and became about reclaiming her power. In the days that followed, the world knew her as the Red Dress Bride. Hashtags trended. Comment sections filled with strangers cheering her courage. Some called her reckless, others called her an icon. But Naomi? She didn't care about either. She cared that she could finally sleep at night knowing she had told her truth without flinching. Because sometimes, the cost of speaking out is high, but the cost of silence, it's far higher. So now, I ask you, if you were Naomi, standing there in that church, every secret laid bare, every heartbeat screaming in your ears, would you have walked away quietly, letting the lies survive? Or would you have done what she did, and made sure the whole world knew the truth, no matter the cost? If her story has stayed with you, if it's made you rethink what betrayal looks like, or reminded you of the strength you didn't know you had, then hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with us, because some stories are more than just tales. Some stories are warnings. Some are battles fought in plain sight. And some, like Naomi's, are the kind you'll never forget.